All right. We'll keep moving on with some of the information. Again, a lot of this is going to build on itself. And so this will be a continuing conversation that you have at your table tonight. Kristen, thank you for introducing us just to a lot of the key ideas here that we are dealing with. And like we said up top, really what the Bible said up top, when we're talking about anxiety, we're not talking about anything clinical here. We're talking about something that's incredibly human that each one of us has felt. That's why there's several commands in the Bible, one from Jesus himself. Do not be anxious about your life. Paul, do not be anxious about anything. When we get anxious, we begin to consider our needs, our self-reliance, our need for approval over God's approval, over our relationship with him. We begin to think just horizontally instead of first going, no, I actually have communion with the creator of the universe. What does he think? That's part of minding that gap. And what does Philippians 4 say? But it says, pray. That's a great way to start minding the gap. And so as we start to walk through sources of both internal anxiety, which is, I'm feeling really, really stressed right now. They may not be able to tell it, but I can just feel it rising up in me. And then Justin's going to come and walk us through sources of relational anxiety, which is we have, maybe it's not conflict, but this is definitely uncomfortable. This is tense. There might be some firecrackers here. It's like, what are sources of that? You know, being able to walk through those things help us mind the gap and also help us kind of walk with people as we're walking through different home group situations, whether you're a coach, whether you're a leader, maybe even in your own family. I know we just finished the holidays, and so maybe we're too late on this training already. But you guys can continue taking some notes here. We will have a sheet for you in your emails at the end of this training that'll have a lot of these definitions. So we're going to walk through sources of internal anxiety. Again, this is kind of, if I can use a Chandlerism, this is that thing that goes on in you right here, in that it's just kind of like welling up from this place. And you can feel it as you talk with people or you think about situations at work or you're driving home from maybe that coffee with that member of your home group or maybe a meeting at the church, and you just kind of feel it here. It's like, what are the sources of some of those things? How can we begin to name them so that we can confront them? So we can say, Lord, I'm feeling this way. Help me understand why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. The first source of internal anxiety might be giants on your shoulder. Let me explain what this is. Giants on your shoulder are your influences, maybe mentors. Could be a parent, could be a pastor, could be a brother or sister, someone who is important in your life. Could have been a coach all those years ago. Could be a coach now. But we carry these people on our shoulder, these giants. We carry them into every leadership encounter. And we can feel judged by them even still. These giants on your shoulder are what happen when you feel like, oh, I'm going to get it wrong. I might not get it right. What are they going to think of me? According to the giant on my shoulder, I might not measure up. And that can be really paralyzing. It's almost like this internal conversation you're having. You remember the old cartoons with like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other? Completely unreal, but it can feel like that. It can feel like inside me I'm having this internal conversation. And one way to know and name this anxiety, this not depending on God, is actually to name it for what it is, which is I need approval. And I might even need approval of someone who's not even here, but I hear their voice in my head all the time. So be aware of who is on your shoulder. Think through, and you might even jot a couple of names down as we're talking about this one. These are real people. These are not cartoon characters. These are not even like maybe people that you admire, that you've read about, or whose books you really enjoy, or who you look up to from afar. This is a real person who's probably had real words, real conversation, real authority, direct authority in your life. They could be mentors. They probably have some sort of authority over you at some point. And you hear their voice all the time. It could be a spouse, quite candidly. Sometimes a giant on your shoulder can be that, man, I came home from that meeting and I was really anxious, and so we came home and kind of talked about it. And you guys, can we talk? Can we just have real talk? It's like sometimes you come home and you're hearing your spouse's version of something and you feel yourself getting real anxious. And you're going like, you don't have to take that from them. Well, what happens is, for the spouse receiving that kind of becomes a giant. So they're driving back to work going like, man, maybe I need to make peace with them. But man, last night, my spouse said, you don't have to take that from them. It's like, maybe they're right. Maybe I don't, and you start having this internal conversation. That's a giant on your shoulder. Very, very difficult. And gosh, it expends a lot of energy. What it usually is not is a godly voice. Now, doesn't mean that it doesn't come from a not godly person. Could be a godly person. It could be that a godly person said something and you took it the wrong way. I mean, this thing is we're just not even going to be able to get into it now. It's just being able to begin that road of saying, what could be a giant on your shoulder? It expends energy. It's usually not godly. It produces fear of man in you. Here's the solution. You have to be able to say, Lord, I want to hear from you. Will you help me? Again, prayer is going to be a big answer to internal anxiety, because along with the conversation with yourself and maybe with giants on your shoulder or some of the other ones we're going to go through here, you are in constant conversation with the Lord of the universe. Part of the solution here is saying, Lord, I don't want to listen to that voice, even maybe if it's the voice of a godly person. Or maybe it's my voice telling me, I need to measure up to this godly person. They would know exactly what to say. I've seen them handle this so well. Those are giants. Lord, I want to hear from you. It's like, would you help me just sort through all of the advice, all of the voices, all of the mentorship, maybe even. Or maybe just hard words that I got from a coach when I was 16. Or that hard bit of feedback I got from a supervisor all those years ago that I still kind of carry with me. Will you help me sort through that so that I can respond in Christ-likeness? The next one is going to be blind spots, or blind spot knowledge and feeling exposed. This is basically when a leadership blind spot is brought to your attention. This is a matter or area you previously could not see. That's why it's a blind spot. Literally like a blind spot in your car. You can't see it. You have to ask someone else who's kind of in the car of life to go, hey, am I clear over there? But a lot of times these blind spot knowledge and feeling exposed come out of nowhere. Nobody likes to be given blind spot knowledge. But without it, you don't grow. Because why? Well, you couldn't see it otherwise. That's one reason we do what we do. That's one of the real trusts of community, is that I'm going to trust you to point out things to me that I can't see. Blind spot knowledge creates anxiety because you feel exposed and you feel at risk all at the same time. And so that starts this kind of physiological stirring within you. You know there's truth there if you're being really honest, and that's why you respond like you do. That's why you get anxious, is because I think there might be a kernel of truth to that. But you're faced with the choice do I be open about it? Do I move toward it? Or do I just deny it and run to save face, to save reputation, whatever it may be? It's never an easy conversation. You can't see a blind spot for yourself. So here's the solution. This is why we do what we do. This is why each of you lead where you lead. We have to confront blind spots. You are God's gift to one another to confront blind spots. So it takes trusted friends. It takes humility. It takes advisors. It takes invitation. It takes checking in often. It's saying wounds of a friend can be trusted. You constantly have to combat it. You have to pray for one another. You have to know each other well enough to know how to pray for one another. That's when you can begin to share blind spots in a way that is constructive, and you can receive blind spot knowledge or even feeling exposed in a way that can be godly and lead to growth. The next source of internal anxiety could be judgment. Man, judgment is exactly what it sounds like. It limits the scope of our leadership because it shrinks the array of people we can lead. Judgment is basically, I'm judging you. You don't measure up for some reason, and so I'm creating a distance between you and I. And it makes assumptions about a person that may not be true. I mean, here are judgments we make all the time. Man, look at them. They're not even wearing seatbelts. Just elevates you a little. Oh, my goodness. Who would take their kid to eat at McDonald's? Those chemicals. Or maybe it's like, man, why don't you take your kid to eat at McDonald's? I don't get what the big deal is. You're so high and mighty. We just do it. We do it all the time. Or maybe they don't lead the way you lead. Right? Maybe they're too fast. They make decisions too quick. Maybe they're not fast enough. Maybe they're not contemplative enough. This begins to set up this narrative of heroes and villains, and inside you, you're usually the hero. You're rarely the villain. You know better. That's how you begin to spot judgment. When you begin to think more highly of yourself than you ought, then you are starting down the road of internal anxiety of judgment. You're thinking more highly of yourself than others. Here's the solution. You can just begin to walk through and name the types and characteristics in people that you tend to judge the most. Now that takes internal work. It's like, where do I tend to be most judgmental? Where do I tend to dehumanize people? Where do I tend to create heroes and villains really easily? And you just do it naturally in your head. So ask the Lord to show you, like, where am I judging people? Where am I setting myself up as God in someone's life to tell them what they should or should not do? Now, we're not talking about sin necessarily here. We're just talking about, like, sometimes personality quirks, parenting styles, leadership styles, those kinds of things. That's judgment. The next one is somewhat akin to it, values violations. This is when someone violates an unspoken value of yours. Sometimes you may not even know it was a value you had until someone violates it, and you find yourself kind of angry. This can also be triggered by someone who shared the same shadow side that you have. Or maybe they share the same value and they just violated that same value, and so that is unacceptable to you. Here's an example. Could be that we're talking and I'm trying to get my idea out and the other person is really excited to be in this conversation with me, so they keep interrupting me. It's a values violation. I know that I've done that myself to others, but I get really annoyed when that happens to me because, that shows me, okay, you don't respect it. You won't let me finish a thought. Obviously, you think what you have to say is more. You see where you start to get into these values violations and you start elevating yourself, or you start distancing yourself from others. That impedes your ability to lead. Maybe it's that, man, why can't they control their kids at group? Like, we have a value. We have an orderly home here. We have this home set up in a way like they should come in and respect that. Our kids never would have done this. Yeah, values violations, right? They begin to elevate you. Man, why can't they be on time? Punctuality was so important. Man, my dad, the coach, we were, if you're early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. That's the way we ran my family. That's the way this family runs. Why can't you guys run your family, get the group on time, right? These are little things, but they're values violations. And when we begin to rehearse them over and over, we distance ourselves from those we lead, and we become less effective leaders. You have to connect with these people. You have to just say, okay, I'm going to calm down right now. I'm going to see you as a fellow believer, and I'm going to recognize in you that you have intrinsic value. And we're going to try and move on to build unity in some of these things. I'm going to stop trying to have judgment, and I'm going to try and check some of my values violations. Next is going to be isolation and exceptionalism. This is the internal need of a leader to feel alone in order to gain something for self. This is kind of self-aggrandizement. Some of you may struggle a bit more with this than others. I tend to find that introverts struggle with this more because you couldn't possibly understand my pain. No one has ever felt like this before, right? It's self-aggrandizement. What? Pumping someone up. Yeah, it's like I'm self-aggrandizement. Like you lift yourself up. Yeah. AGGRANDIZEMENT. You can look it up. Use the Google. Here's what this does a hero narrative differently. This tends to think of other people as like, oh, you mere mortals. I have this somehow like superhuman ability to feel, to see, and it isolates you because it begins to puff you up. You're more exceptional. You know better. You have deeper life experience. You have more wisdom. You have more success. And this creates a loneliness in leadership, or maybe it even just creates self-pity. It props up a myth. And this loneliness in leadership can be very real. Remember the old song, "Nobody knows the trouble I've seen, nobody knows but Jesus." This is the song. This is the song of the person who is trapped in isolation and exceptionalism. My Enneagram says this about me. This is who I am. You don't understand my pain, my burden, my suffering. Well, here's the solution to this. Do you want to wallow on your mat, or do you want to get up? This is where you talk to Jesus, and he's saying, hey, do you want to wallow in the self-pity, in your suffering, in your lack of healing? Do you want to get off the mat today? The invitation is constantly there, but for the person caught in isolation and exceptionalism, sometimes we like that. We like being alone. We like being isolated. But God doesn't leave you alone, and we're not leading ministry that is dependent on you being alone. God is relationship. Trinity, 3 persons, 3 times. It's emphatic. You're made in his image, so you're not made to be isolated and alone. You have to kind of preach these things to yourself. Next is anger fantasies and the need for an enemy. These are insidious because they feel so good and so natural. This is along the lines of that hero-villain narrative. You'll notice a lot of these are very, very similar. This is self-righteousness. This is playing out conversations over and over after the fact. I'll show them. Oh, next time I'm going to get them good. Here's how I'm going to answer next time. Anger fantasies. Me versus them. A way you might recognize this is, who are the people that when they're coming down the hallway, you just want to go, I don't want to face them. It sets this up in that, like, I need an enemy. I don't talk to you. We don't talk. We don't get along. It becomes very, very us versus them. And so you play out conversations, and what you begin to do is you dehumanize a person. You begin to not consider the nuances of their life, what their struggles may be. What this actually is the opposite of the one another command. Consider one another's above yourselves. It's actually, I'm going to consider me over you. And so you don't enter in to try and do some of the personal work to consider the dimensions, the life story of what someone that you've pitted as an enemy may be going through. So you develop anger fantasies and the need for an enemy. The way you combat this is the way you combat any self-righteousness, with follow the one another commands. Get outside of yourself. Consider one another more highly than yourselves. Serve one another. In fact, here's this one. Stop biting and devouring one another, Paul said. That's what anger fantasies or need for an enemy does. And lastly, there's doubt. There's self-doubt that goes on internally. There's doubt in God. Self-doubt is the voices in your head saying, you're not enough. Who do you think you are trying to lead this group, trying to lead these leaders? Someday the people in this church are going to find out you're not the real deal. Then a real leader will step up and you'll be exposed. That's that voice. You may even graft this voice onto God. You may think it's God saying that, but that's not godly. But that's the insidiousness of self-doubt. And the only way to confront this is with gospel reminders in the very biblical prayers, like, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. I know you've put me here at this time, in this people. It's no mistake we're sitting in this living room together, and you've called me to lead them into growth in Jesus Christ, called me to lead them in community. I know you've done that. I'm not here by mistake. All these major celebrities, from Madonna to Donny Osmond, all have these stories of intense self-doubt, but they don't lean on God. They instead try to reinvent their persona. That's a false gospel. It's actually the original lie. Did God really say that he'd provide what you need to lead this group? Did God really say he'd provide what you need as you're sitting across the table at Starbucks trying to pour into a leader? Did God really say? It's the original lie. So the solution is, Lord, I know that you have placed me here. This is no mistake that I'm sitting at this table with this person, or in this circle with these leaders, or with this group at this time. I know this is my mission. Spirit, help me. I know you love me. God, I know I'm your beloved. I know that. I know you treasure me. Would you help me show another person how they're treasured in Christ? This is how you begin to combat yourself out of internal anxiety. And so we ran through those. Take a few minutes to consider those sources of internal anxiety. I'll put them back up on the screen here in just a minute. But walk through those, and much like we did, continue that conversation at your table. Was there one that struck you most personally? Was there one to where you're going like, yeah, that has had negative influences in my life, or I recognized myself in that definition? Are there ones that are impacting your leadership or your relationships? So consider those things and share with the people around your table before Justin comes up and starts talking about the relational sources of anxiety. We'll take a few minutes.